Well, we'll come to that, the governorship tribunal verdict much later in the program, but we're starting off, as we mentioned earlier, with this labor matter where they suspended the strike, as you've seen, almost all the dailies reflecting that this morning. So Wale Oyerinde joins us this morning. He's the DG of NECA. So good morning, Mr. Smart, and I'm going to go through the agreements, that some of the high points of that agreement. So there was this memorandum of understanding that was reached between the federal government of Nigeria and Nigeria Labour Congress, as well as the TUC, as a result of the dispute arising from withdrawal of subsidy on the price of premium motor spirit on Monday, the 2nd of October, 2023. Now, so arising from the withdrawal of that PMS, Labour, of course, went back and forth, Labour and TUC, with government on what needs to be done. So that meeting that was called to avert the strikes, some of the agreements reached first was federal government grants a wage award of 35,000 naira only to all federal workers beginning from the month of September, pending when a new national minimum wage is expected to have been signed into law. Second, a minimum wage committee shall be inaugurated within 1 month from the date of this agreement, which was when they signed yesterday. And then federal government suspends collection of value-added tax on diesel for 6 months, beginning from October 2023. Then let me stop at this one before we come to you. FG accepts to vote 100 billion naira for the provision of high-capacity CNG buses for mass transit in Nigeria. Provisions are also being made for initial 55,000 CNG conversion kits to kickstart an auto gas conversion program, while work is ongoing on state-of-the-art CNG stations nationwide. The rollout aims to commence by November with pilots across 10 campuses nationwide. These are some of the highlights of that agreement that they had, about 15 points in that memorandum. So you might have gone through all of those. What are your immediate thoughts now? You think, having come to this agreement, this is the way forward?
Well, thank you, Chamberlain, and thanks for having us. I think first, the first consolation is the triumph of social dialogue. We had insisted, or we had canvassed severally, that there is no alternative to social dialogue. Whether we agree, we must agree to disagree, we must disagree to agree, but still, social dialogue remains the most veritable platform for us to achieve whatever objective that we have, and we are glad about that. Secondly, the outcome, or some of the outcomes, I think is points to some level of progress. The award to federal workers is also a level of progress achieved by Labour, which is also good for its members. The conversation about the CNG buses, I think that has been on the table since August or since July. And we're also happy that some definitive timelines, so those are part of the issues we had. There are no definitive timelines to the president's comments in August, but we are glad that some definitive timelines has been put to the provision of the CNG buses and also the pilot schemes that are how it will be implemented, which is also good. So by and large, there are some positives in the agreement signed, and it's also gladdening that reason prevailed and Labour has suspended the strike, albeit for 30 days. We just hope that both parties will live up to the commitments that they have signed and help the country to avert this unnecessary disruption of economic activities that we have had. But it's progress that we have made, but fundamentally, why we deal with these issues of wage and there is also more fundamental issues about our industrial relations system that should be dealt with once we deal with this issue of strike and we go back to work. The strikes, incessant strikes, are basically just symptoms of a more fundamental challenge in our industrial relations system. And I think this we must all go back to as stakeholders, workers, employers, and government, and find a path towards a sustainable industrial harmony that will guarantee our economic renaissance.
Okay, so let me also go to one of the points here. The 10th point indicates that the federal government should urge state governments through the National Economic Council and Governors Forum to implement wage award for their workers. Similar consideration should also be given to local government and private sector workers. That's where you probably might come in here. How do you see this playing out?
Yeah, so for us at the private sector, it's quite unfortunate that Labour also did not find it necessary to commend the private sector for the role it has played. And while the president noted the role of the private sector in his August broadcast of taking the initiatives, we have, since July, immediately the president announced the removal of fuel subsidy and the consequential effect of increase in cost of living. So the private sector has actually taken the bull by the horn. You followed our comments. We have, most private sector organizations have either increased wages or adjusted wages, increased allowances or adjusted allowances, come up with different schemes, product sharing on a monthly basis, come up with transport scheme, joint transport schemes to assist their employees. Some have come up with new models of work, reducing working days to maybe to 3 or 4 working days per week so that the pressure on transportation costs can also be reduced. So the private sector has taken the lead. We have shown the way, we have shown the direction, we have shown innovation in supporting employees cross-board. So the issue, the challenge will be how the states will respond and how the local government will respond. And we also hope that they will respond appropriately.
So the part where it says FGE to provide tax incentive for private sector, would that cut it?
Well, we want to commend the decision and those behind it, but you cannot shave a man's hair behind his back. And we have emphasized it. And we are also hoping that those advising governments, they are up to their game in the context of our industrial relations system. The fundamental context that you cannot discount in all these labor-employer relationship, in all this context of our industrial relations system, is the importance of the tripartite. The tripartite is fundamentally employers represented by NECA, labor represented by NLC, TUC, and government represented by TUC. While we concede to the fact that government can have bipartite engagement, that's between government and workers, or government and employers, or employers and workers, bipartisan is also allowed. But when issues are quite fundamental, like this conversation we're having, it is very important that the tripartite be brought in to have that conversation. Now, an agreement has been signed. Now, the agreement is already dragging in a component of the private sector. It's already dragging in some issues that affect the private sector. And the private sector was not simply involved in that conversation. So those are the anomalies that we want to accept is an oversight for now. But moving forward, we want to advise government and those advising government. And look, the tripartism is the foundation of industrial relations system in any country. And the ILO itself also affirms it in all these conventions and all these recommendations. And we cannot discount that. And Chairman, if you permit me, we have mentioned the issue of the national minimum wage. We hope that government will not put the cart before the horse, because the standard practice, the conventional practice globally on setting national minimum wage, we suppose that the tripartite must be consulted. The employers must be consulted to send in their members. The workers must be consulted to send in their members, and government representatives across the board must also be part of that negotiation. It is not a unilateral pronouncement on TV or radio. It's a tripartite conversation, and we hope that government will do the needful and not muddled up the whole process of setting up the national minimum wage.
Okay, Mr. Erinde, fantastic submissions you made this morning, especially about the industrial relations. I was just scribbling some things there, the challenges and resolutions to this matter. But would you say that the private sector because they were not part of the conversation or were not mobilized for this, would you say that there are no benefits from the conversations that have already been had?
Absolutely. There are benefits, basically. You know, we had earlier made our recommendation concerning the issue of VAT on diesel. So it is being re-echoed in the conversation between Labour and government, which is fine. We have made our submission on the negative effect of the VAT on diesel. We had made our recommendation, which we believe strongly also led to the constitution of the Taiwo Yedele Presidential Committee on Tax Reforms on the issue of multiple taxes. So bringing it on this context is also a reinforcement that government accepts those issues. So those are positives that we acknowledge, but we say that you cannot or you should not shave a man's head behind his back. We have made pronouncements. MOU has been signed, which we appreciate, and we commend Labour for its forthrightness and commend government for its commitment. But the fundamental issue remains that when an issue affects the tripartite, then the tripartite should be brought on board to have a say, not only to have a say, but to have a part in the implementation of those agreements.
Yeah, but in this case now, the tripartite, if I may come in, Mr. Erinde, in this case, the tripartite team is not as if one part has been kept out. It's just saying that, okay, let's do this. This is an emergency meeting to say, okay, after 1 month, we'll reconvene. But within that 1 month, a tripartite committee to look at the minimum wage thing will be looked at as well. But in this case also, is the fact that you were concerned about the taxes, the issue of tax rebates for the private sector. That was agreed on yesterday. It's not as if the conversation, the details of that have even been put forth yet. Maybe that's something that's going to be looked at. But you talked about the issue, the fundamental issue of industrial relations. If we continue to stay in this space where, because we are not called into conversations, we are not going to do anything about it, is that where we want to be? Or how best can we move forward, seeing that this is the way government's been rolling over time and this conversation has continued?
It has, you can't build a structure on a faulty foundation. That will take us back to where we are coming from. You can't excuse inappropriateness. Those are fundamental issues that we must know. I said earlier that bipartisan, an agreement between government and workers, or an agreement or conversation between government and employers is also in the books. It's allowed. There can be bipartisan. I can have an agreement between an employer and labor. And come to think of it, during COVID, employers and the unions, we had a bipartite agreement. We did not call government, a bipartite agreement to say that during the COVID period, during the height of the COVID period, that employers will do all within its powers not to retrench any worker. And will do all due diligence not to retrench workers during COVID. It was an agreement between labor and employers. We did not call government because it doesn't involve government. So that is bipartisan at its best, which is acceptable. But when the issue now involves government, we cannot speak for government in that context of that agreement. So if we are talking now of federal workers or government should not retrench workers, then we have to bring in government to say part of this conversation, this part of our agreement, so that we can make progress in that context. And that is the issue that we have. We are not against the conversation that has been held by labor and government. We promoted it, we supported it, we urged both of them to find a path towards resolving this issue for the sake of all concerned. So I think we have to be clear on that. We don't have any problem with bipartisan with the conversation between labor and employers. But when the private sector employers' issue is to be brought on board, then the needful must be done. That you cannot compromise.
Well, Mr. Erinde, let me quickly take you back to the question Chimelin asked you about the consideration that should be given by private sector workers, employers, of course, about the resolution of the wage award, the implementation of the wage award for workers. What are the consequences of
that action that you have already, spoken to, do you see employers being able to implement this wage award for the private sector as opposed to what the federal government and perhaps the state governments might be able to do?
For the private sector, as I mentioned earlier, we are probably doing far above what the government has just announced. The private sector, as I said, we've taken the lead. Allowances has been increased across board, not just one allowance, across board. In some instances, salaries have been reviewed, not in the context of 6 months, but we've reviewed salaries, allowances have been reduced, have been increased, and we've started implementation as early as July. So we are far ahead of the conversation on this issue of palliatives or intervention or wage award, as you want to call it. The private sector is far ahead of it. The same way we are ahead of the national minimum wage. But on that, the minimum wage in most sectors, it's not 30,000. I think we should understand that.
Well, that is understood, Mr. Yeride, but just a quick one. Can we say the same thing for the micro, small, and medium enterprises, particularly the nano and micro?
The MSMEs, yes. The MSMEs, if you check the national minimum wage law itself, the MSMEs, the micro, small, they're not captured in the national minimum wage. They're not captured because the national minimum wage has certain provisions. It has certain threshold for who is captured in the national minimum wage. So for the MSMEs, what government can do and what we have advocated is infrastructural development that will support their operations. And that's why we are glad with the conversation about the CNG buses, because it's going to go to the heart of the operations of the MSMEs. We are also happy with the issue of the refineries, because in reduced fuel cost, we also go to the heart of the operation of the MSMEs.
On the issue of the refineries, item 12, of course, on that agreement also said a joint visitation will be made to the refineries to ascertain their rehabilitation status. How hopeful are you, particularly in the light of what your agreement with Mr. Oyedele, that the refineries should be privatized? How hopeful are you that this rehabilitation will actually see the light of day?
We had actually hoped that the last administration, before at the twilight of their stay, will complete the refinery. So from grade 5, we also know a lot of work has been put in place. The government has made commitment. This is not the first commitment we are making, that the refineries will come on board by December. We are quite hopeful that the Port Harcourt refineries come on board. Having said that, I think the long-term solution is for us the transparent, I emphasize the word, the transparent privatization of the other refineries. We've shown our incapacity or unwillingness as a nation or government to make those refineries work. Angels don't run refineries. Everywhere in the world, it's humans that run refineries. And we have a private refinery that was commissioned a few months ago. So if an individual can start, complete, and about to start running a refinery, there's no reason why we as a nation cannot do the same. That having said, I think privatization, transparent privatization of the refineries, I think for us is the way to go. But we are very hopeful that the Port Harcourt refineries will come on board as announced by the president in December.
All right, then. So who knows? Maybe private sector probably might better organize themselves and see how they ensure that these issues are tackled headlong moving forward. Could be food for thought. Well, I'd like to thank you for talking to us this morning. Wale Smart-Oyedele is the Director General of Nigeria Employers Consultative Association, NECA, who joined us virtually. We'll be back and then turn our attention to the recently decided Adamawa governorship election at the tribunal. That's one leg of it, but there are several other steps. So that is coming up next.